We start with your Bombers, 1 and 6. The fans are angry and it's hard to know where next for the Bombers. They've had promises to set standards, Matthew, that haven't worked. Before I get your view on this, this was Andy McGrath, first of all, 2 weeks ago, and then Peter Wright after the game on the weekend.
We've spoken a lot about our discipline as a playing group and just not getting things done that are at an AFL standard. This week we've kind of, I guess, put a full stop on any acceptance on any of that and making that an expectation that if you can't do that, you can't play.
We just spoke as a playing group, obviously very disappointed, hurting. It's an uncomfortable feeling. You never like underperforming and not playing to your standards, so we're hurting as much as everyone, so we look to butter up and go again next week.
A lot of words, but the standards at the moment are out the window.
They are, Hutchie. They're as bad as probably North and West Coast, probably the two worst, but they're not far off that. Just above that in terms of competitiveness. They've been belted in 2 or 3 of their 7 games so far, and this wasn't how it was meant to be. And I just wonder whether the expectations from administration, Caro, where they probably tried to undersell what they were going to achieve this year, is filtered down because it's just not good enough what they've put out this year.
Well, there certainly was an underselling of expectations going into 2022, but we've talked about that for a few weeks. We've got to look more deeply now, Matthew and Craig and Kane, into what has actually gone wrong at Essendon over the last few years. And in the end, is it the personnel? And is it the people who are choosing the personnel?
Yeah, well, I think we'll come to that when we have a look at the trade record in a second. Dylan Shield probably is the reason you raise that. And weird double message to send on the weekend. We won't stand for it. He's not playing. That's not said publicly, but I'm sure it's said privately. And then he bobs up as the 23rd player and he's suiting up next to them on the weekend. It's half a dozen, 6 of one, half a dozen the other, isn't it?
I'm not as hard on it. Some others are, but I think since Andrew McGrath made that statement, we haven't seen Devon Smith since. And then Dylan Shields was next in line. So I think they are being harder, but at the same time, I can't wait to get to the game style element because I think this is stifling the way players are playing, in my opinion, the way Ben Rutten is asking his team to play.
It's a long way back from meeting 2 weeks ago, putting a full stop on standards, and then Peter Wright saying, well, we met yesterday. I mean, how many times can you meet? And you alluded to so many words, Hutchie, but it's round 7. I mean, what lever do they have left to pull?
And we'll get to the game structure, which is clearly a big issue, the way they're playing. Their trades have not worked. Shields 3 years into 7 years and they paid a lot for it. You couldn't put that down as even remotely a success. Devon Smith, I know there's a best and fairest in there, but and Sard's since gone. Stringer has had flashes and Bird's been brilliant. Cutler hasn't worked and Hind a good year last year, admitted. Wright coming good, but it has not worked. And that's all happened on the same recruiting manager's watch. Now, this might sound unfair, but if you think of the coach and recruiting manager / list manager as the 2 most important jobs in footy, it's hard to imagine a senior coach surviving, good, bad or indifferent, that run. So he's either being let down badly by coaches and by game structure, or they've got to make a change.
Yeah, I mean, there was compliments around letting Fantasia and Danaher and Sard go and getting the youngsters in, and I think that is legitimate. I think the 3 that they picked up, Reid and Cox and Perkins are going to be very good players, but it's the best job to have in football. I mean, you get the longest longevity and sort of no one works out whether you've passed or failed it for a long period of time. Caro, do you think there'll be significant changes? And Ben Rutten, it is his 3rd year in charge, and the areas of their game that are breaking down is across the board. It's not just one area. Is there pressure on Ben?
Clearly there's pressure on Ben. I'm not going to write him off right now as a senior coach, but I look at the whole coaching panel, Kane, and Matthew, I'll ask you this. Essendon's DNA, when you were playing, it's always been, sometimes I felt there was a bit of a messiah complex because there were such big stars and big names at the footy club. Now Ben Rutten's talking about a blue-collar style of team and a style of play. All his assistants, led by Blake Carousella, are sort of all of a bit of a similar type. And I'm also wondering, Essendon were always a tough and pretty aggressive club, and they could get. They were street fighters when they needed to be. There's something a bit nice about them at the moment. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it has been too accepting. There's always been a reason that we're few players off. It's not our time. It's this. It's that. And I know Andrew McGrath in that interview said, "I'm sick of hearing that." And I just think that Mark Williams, for example, I'm wondering who the next Choco Williams is out there that they can get into that panel and razz some players up, because I think, there is an element of that. I think for Mark Williams to walk in and say to Clayton Oliver, you're not a great kick. Not many coaches would say that to a player, whereas Choco Williams doesn't care, does he?
No.
So I think that's something that has to be looked at.
They're too nice as a footy club. that footy club was built on.
Who's nasty though, Hutchie? Well, I mean, we say they're too nice, but who in the competition? Who's a nasty coach?
You look back to the Lloyd era, and it was an angry president and a combative coach, McMahon and Sheedy, and there was the Johnson brothers, and there was enforcers on every line.
Hawthorn in their great era played unsociable football.
Long time ago now, though. Like,
who would you go to war with at Essendon? If you looked at war's a bad example in the current circumstances, but you know what I mean. Who would you?
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you, but across the board, when you say they're too nice, who's not nice? I mean, is John Longmire not
I think a lot
nice?
of premiership coaches aren't. I think Dimmer Hardwick has a streak to him.
But Simon Goodwin seems to be a nice guy.
Yeah, but that's where you do need to surround yourself with people who are different to you. I suppose that's probably the point of it. And I know, Kane, for a fact that Oliver and Petrarca and the way they've been taught to play a certain way has been driven into them around the way you've got to defend the ground, the way you've got to play. You can't be accepted. When Trent Cotchin was chasing kicks, it has to be instilled into you in a certain way, not the bang and crash like we used to cop, but there has to be firm language towards how you play. And
so they're going sideways, they're getting a million midfield positions, and then other teams are preying on it. Adam Treloar, if you read between the lines here, said as much on the weekend, I thought.
They might be the number one team changed from Stockbridge, and we knew that coming into the game. We knew that if we were able to pressure them with hands, there was an opportunity for them to turn the ball over. And we try to reference off the contest as well as we can, that being the defenders. So, if they were to look up, there's nowhere to go, which forces them to handball the ball.
So this was Anzac Day. So I hated hearing Essendon after the game. So we just handballed too much. This was after the Bulldogs game, because this happened 6 days earlier where they handballed. And then a week later, so the Dogs just sweating on it. Force them to handball and a turnover will eventually happen. So, Hutchie, I just want to...
Whose fault is that?
Oh, I think it's a coaching. What's this one, though? This is Guelphy. You'd expect, I'll pause it, expect everyone to say, run, tuck this under your arm. Look at the third game of Hobbs. He's demanding the footy. He doesn't get it the first time. He cuts across a player again. That's what I'd say Trent Cotchin used to do until they said, we can't cop that from you anymore. You are getting in the way of players trying to kick the ball and take it forward. That's now where Essendon are 5-10 years on, Caro.
They transformed their game style, and Trent Cotchin did get pretty nasty.
He did.
And it just transfers the pressure. That is great vision. This is why I'm really worried about them as well, is because I used to love working Essendon games. It's so good to go and watch because you knew their offensive style was going to stack up. 5th last year in any metric of moving the ball, pretty much top 4 and 1 for stoppage exit to score. That's the contrast to this year. So they've lost their only weapon. Now, that would never win you a premiership, just the offensive stuff. But they're now horribly defensively and they can't move the footy. So the amount of time, we could have shown a million clips on this. Sideways, slow, wide, to the point where their best player is demanding the footy up the ground. You can't see him off the screen. But once again, Merritt does that all the time. Parrish, we've seen it. You get the long kick down the line, so easy to defend. And watch Jake Stringer here. You reckon you'd want to play in this forward line? He's that frustrated by it. Their best player is going, move the ball quicker. It's just too easy to defend.
That's a confused football team. They're not clear in how they're supposed to play.
Can I just go back
the way they've been told to play.
Craig, can I just go back to what your point made earlier about recruiting and Adrian Dodoro, who's been there for much longer than those dates you gave because he had other roles at the club going back to the late 1900s. Do you think it's time to get a new manager?
He's highly respected by the other teams and in football circles, and he's a fantastic person. But if you put that resume up in isolation, they're going to have to do something to change the mix there, aren't they? That can't continue. He would probably argue, I'm sure he's been let down by coaches along the way and by development, because it's not just one thing, is it? But that's not... It just can't continue.
Yeah, I think when you make big moves and you give 7-year contracts to players that are now playing, as a sub and a drop, then the pressure rightly comes on you.
Hutchie, they play Hawthorn this week, who are a team that just goes for it and goes forward. So if they're not on notice right now, they couldn't...
And a bitter enemy, you wouldn't
exactly
want to
right. They have to be bold. Go down being bold.